Hey book besties, welcome back to my channel where we yap about books and book boyfriends. And today we are going to be talking about the infamous spicy chili pepper scale. So we're gonna go over my official spicy scale, how I rate the spice in spicy books, and what books you should read based on each chili pepper rating. What is a spicy scale? Why do we use it? And what does it mean? So a spicy scale is basically a little scale that we have made up in the book talk or book community that is gonna be a scale of little chili pepper symbols that signifies how much spicy material is in a book. So first of all, let's start with what my spicy scale looks like and what each of the little symbols mean. Primarily, my spicy scale is going to be from 1 to 5, 5 being the most spicy and 1 being the least spicy. And this is going to be represented by little chili pepper symbols. So we have 1 chili pepper, 2 chili peppers, 3 chili peppers, 4, or 5. And then I personally have 2 little fun extra symbols that are the green bell pepper and the fire emoji. So before we get into the official spice scale ranking and talking about what each level means, we're gonna talk about 2 terms that are open door and closed door when it comes to spice. So closed door spice is going to mean that there is romance in the book. You know what's happening. We know that our characters are getting physically intimate. However, you don't see the detail on page. It's not explicit writing. There's not graphic terms. And ultimately, usually those are fade to black. So that would be closed door, which means the door is kind of closing, you're going out of the room while they do their spicy stuff like off page. And then open door spice is going to be exactly what it sounds like. Basically, if you think about 2 characters that are having an intimate moment, we're gonna open the door and be able to see every single thing that they're doing. So open door romance and open door spice means that it is on page, it is written, it is in detail, we have anatomical terms, and it's gonna be really clear and obvious the entire time what our characters are doing when it comes to getting physical. So with those 2 terms in mind, let's talk about my official spicy scale from the green bell pepper all the way up to the flame emoji and the little spicy scale in between. So if we're starting out with the green pepper is going to fall completely under the closed door romance, closed door spice type of thing. If you're reading a book that I am classifying as a green chili pepper, a bell pepper is not spicy. So a bell pepper book is not going to be spicy. Usually these are young adult books, they are high fantasy books, they can be contemporary romance books. Like any book that has romance in it can still fall under a green chili pepper and can still not have spice in it. And when I'm reading a book with a green chili pepper, it really means that there could be romance, there could not be romance, but if there is romance, it is all closed door, it is all fade to black, there might be some kissing or holding hands or some sort of like brief physical contact. However, there will never be any on-page explicit spicy material. You will not find that in a green chili pepper book. And then some of my favorite books to recommend that would fall under the green chili pepper category if you're not really into spice are going to be the Red Rising Saga by Pierce Brown. The first trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. We also have the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. Both of these books have like subplots of romance in them. So there is romance, there is like kissing, we have interactions between characters. However, there is never any on-page explicit material. If you like fae and fantasy, the Cruel Prince trilogy is also going to be a green chili pepper. This one gets a little bit heated, but ultimately the romance scenes in this book are all fade to black and they're sort of metaphorically descriptive, so there is nothing explicit on page. We also have the Fireborn trilogy by Rosaria Munda. This is sort of the young adult version of Fourth Wing. This also has a strong romance subplot, however, it is not spicy. And then one of my favorite series of all time, which is the Bone Season series. This is also an adult sort of dystopian fantasy series. This has a romance subplot in it, and I actually really love the romance in it. It's sort of like really mild monster romance. There is no on-page spice. There is beautiful character development and romance, but ultimately it is not explicit. So let's move on to the 1 chili pepper, which will be 1 chili pepper out of 5 on the scale. And this is going to mean that there is 1 probably brief open door spicy scene, and it's not like overly explicit. So for example, you might read a book that is probably like 90% plot, it's got a romance subplot, it's got characters in it, and it will have a scene eventually of them getting together. And there are usually explicit terms in here, but usually these scenes are short and they kind of use explicit language less. So you kind of go from start to finish of the act, like you know what's happening, they don't close the door before like the end of the act happens. However, normally it's written a little bit more metaphorical, it's written a little bit more artistically, it's not using like graphic anatomy terms, so you know what's happening, you get the feelings from what's happening, like you connect emotionally with the characters in their experience, but it's not a super long scene, it's normally maybe like 3 to 7 pages, and the language is not going to feel overly graphic or like in your face. And it's usually not the main focus of the book. Like if there's a really short explicit scene, like usually the romance is the focus, the character development is the focus. It's not really about the spice, but the spice in this case is necessary to further the story and to emotionally connect with the characters. So a few of my favorite One Chili Pepper books are going to be, number one is Lightlark and Nightbane, more so Nightbane. So this book definitely is not a green chili pepper because it's got like fully romantic acts in it. However, it is not super explicitly written. It's not super long scenes, but they are in here. So Lightlark is sort of on the young adult, new adult scale, and it's really hard to describe, but the way that it is written is not graphic. So you have an act that is happening from start to finish. We know what the characters are doing. If we have all the context clues, we have some really pretty language that describes what they're doing without using like body part terms, but ultimately they are not super long and they are not crazy graphic. Another book that would fall under this category is Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. That's a contemporary romance. That's got some explicit material in it. I would say it's a little bit spicy. It is definitely not a green chili pepper. However, any instances that are in here are very short and they are not using super explicit terms. And then an adult fantasy romance that's a really good example of this, because again, you can have an adult book that does not have spice in it. Adult and spice are not synonymous. And my favorite one of these is one of my favorite gothic fantasy romances, which is One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, the Shepherd King duology. Now these are primarily focused on the story. They have significant romance plot lines, but in each book there is one scene and they are both under 10 pages each. So it is brief, it is necessary to the character development, necessary to the story, but ultimately it's a very small part of the story and of the books. And when you are reading those scenes, they are not overly graphic. They are more metaphorical, they are more like artistically descriptive, and you're kind of not really gonna feel like you're overstepping and like reading about something super private between people. It really is more of like an artistic writing expression. All right, so let's move on to the 2 chili peppers, meaning 2 out of 5. This is going to include 3 or more scenes that are moderately explicit, or in my opinion, it can also be like one really long scene. For example, if you're reading like a standalone or you're reading a book that is romance focused and it does eventually have like a pinnacle spicy scene that is like 15 to 20 pages long, I feel like that still falls under a 2 chili pepper category. I'll give you an example of that in a second. But these are going to be very detailed, very graphic, very explicit. They're gonna have anatomy terms. You're gonna know exactly what the characters are doing, and they'll happen within a series or a book more than 2 times. And it's a little steamy. So some examples of books, if you're looking for recommendations for the 2 chili pepper spice scale, would be Quicksilver by Callie Hart, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, Serpent in the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. All right, moving on to level 3, we have 3 chili peppers out of 5 on the spicy scale. This is going to be 3+ fully explicit scenes if we're talking about like a single book, and then usually in a series overall, if it's gonna be a slow burn to spice, it just means that like generally in the series overall. So this would mean basically that like you have story, you have plot, you're gonna have open door explicit spice that is happening 3 or more times. It is a big part of the story. When it's on page, it is very in your face. So these are probably slightly longer scenes, or it might be a combination of like a couple short ones into like a really big crazy one. And they are going to be very descriptive, very open door, and a little bit more intense. So some book examples of a 3 chili pepper spice rating would be Nocticadia by Carrie Lake, Bewitched and Bespelled by Laura Thalassa, Gothicana, Phantasma by Kaylee Smith, Throne of the Fallen by Carrie Maniscalco. Now these are all books where the romance is much more prominent, the story sort of focuses around the romance, and there are multiple scenes where we're having open door, explicit, on-page material. Normally the scenes are quite long, or they start short and then they progressively get longer throughout the book or throughout the series. And honestly, in my opinion, I feel like 2.5 and like 3 chili peppers are where I am most comfortable, because normally even with a 3 chili pepper book or a 3 chili pepper series, you're going to have a lot of plot. I would say it's probably still like 60 to 70% plot in your story. While romance is a bigger percent, romance is going to be like 30 to 40%, and then spice is somewhere in there. I personally really like the balance between a plot and character development and story and a 3 chili pepper spice scale. scale because we get enough scenes to like get that little spicy excitement. However, my primary focus is on the plot of the book, and I would much rather connect with the story and the emotion and the characters, and I feel like you get a lot of that in a 3 Chili Pepper book. I feel like that's really the sweet spot of a spicy fantasy book for me, or a generally spicy book. So if you're wondering, like anywhere from 2 to 3 is my personal preference when it comes to spicy books or spicy fantasy. Moving on to 4 Chili Peppers, level 4 on the spicy scale, probably more than 3 scenes. It is always on page, explicit material, very descriptive, usually longer scenes, and they are happening more frequently throughout the book or throughout the series. We also start to get to an area here where the spicy and romance plot sort of starts to rival the overall like regular plot of the book. So the romance is forefront, it is about the romance, and it is a little bit more about the spicy part of the romance when we're dealing with the romance. So there's usually a lot more like tension, a lot more focus on like physicality. And then the best examples I have of like 4 Chili Pepper books and series would be the Zodiac Academy series, Darkmoor Penitentiary series, the Legends of Thesmar series, the Bonds That Tie series. And I feel like this one's hard because I feel like I personally would rate it like 3.5, maybe almost 4, depending on where you are in the series. But the Plated Prisoner series probably is technically like not 3, but not quite 4 either. It's right in the middle because there is still a lot of plot in the Plated Prisoner series. And these books are really more focused on the romantic development, on the characters, on the like physicality, on the tension, on all of that stuff. And then sometimes when you get up to something like a 4 Chili Pepper, like for me personally, it's also the type of spice that's happening. So when you get up into like 4 Chili Peppers, you have things like Darkmoor Penitentiary and Bonds That Tie, which are reverse harems. So that means there is 1 FMC, 1 female main character, and then I think 2 or 3 or more male main characters. So it basically means there's 1 female character and she is having physical moments with multiple love interests at the same time. Also, the type of spice will get a little bit more taboo, a little bit more like weird when you move into the 4 Chili Pepper category because it's a little bit deeper, it's more of the focus. You get to explore like darker elements, you get to explore different types of spice because we're focused on it more. So when you reach the 4 Chili Pepper area, you're probably gonna get reverse harems, you might get a little bit of taboo romance. A lot of dark romances would be 4 Chili Peppers. I would say something like the Ravenhood series is probably also a 4 Chili Pepper contemporary romance. And then also something like the Twisted series. I feel like that probably really comfortably falls into the 4 Chili Pepper category. So that's where we're at with 4 Chili Peppers. Now let's move into 5 Chili Peppers, the 5 out of 5 on the spicy scale rating. And this is going to be where the spice and the romance sort of overshadows the plot in the book. So there is still plot. We're not only reading it for the spice, there is plot in it. However, the amount of spice percentage-wise and romance percentage-wise is definitely higher than like plot percentage-wise. The best examples that I have for this are the Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac series, and then my most recent read, which was the Court of Ravens duology. These are extremely spicy. So much so that there's probably like a spicy scene like every few chapters. It's quite a lot. But even on the Chili Pepper scale, if we're going 5 out of 5, there is still immaculate plot in these books. Like I do not personally recommend books, even if they're 5 Chili Peppers that have like no plot in them. That is not what I'm interested in. However, there is a lot of spice that is going along with the plot in the book. So Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac, I feel like is definitely 5 Chili Peppers. That's also a reverse harem. So you've got like a lot of characters that you got to get with at a lot of different times. So like you kind of have to have a lot of spice. And then A Court of Ravens also has 2 MMCs who've got a little bit of sharing, and Court of Ravens goes a lot deeper into the dark romance and darker taboo elements. So the type of spice in a 5 Chili Pepper book is sometimes going to be uncomfortable, is sometimes going to be mentioned on like warning pages. So usually when you have 5 Chili Peppers, not only is it extremely spicy, extremely frequent, and extremely detailed, but it can also get into that like weird or uncomfortable territory. It is definitely not like vanilla, like regular spice happening in here. It's usually kind of weird, it's usually kind of dark and twisted, and it's very frequent. So let's talk about the outlier, the flame emoji. And honestly, if you're listening to my book recommendations, if you know anything about me, I probably will never recommend a book that is a fire emoji. And if you ever see a fire emoji, that's very out of character, and I'm probably only talking about the book to just like say something about it. So a fire emoji would be something, in my opinion, that is more similar to erotica, where the entire point of the book, the entire point of the series is to kind of get you excited and focus on the spice and like distract you in that way. The best book that I can think of as an example for a fire emoji would be Court of the Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. And this is a book that was written specifically for the spice, for the romance. The plot is not important at all. Like, I did not enjoy this book because there was no plot. But it is for people, if they're only looking for spice, that is definitely a book that I would recommend, and it would be a fire emoji. And obviously, when we're talking about a fire emoji, we're talking about 10 plus spicy scenes over the course of a book or like a trilogy or whatever. Like, we're talking about a lot. They're happening all the time. They're probably really weird and really taboo if we're getting into 5 Chili Peppers, and there's probably multiple people involved. So it's a lot. So that is generally my spicy scale rating. When I'm giving you book recommendations, I'm going to recommend them based on those standards when I'm talking about the spicy levels. And then I wanted to address how I rate like a series, and I wanted to talk about what everyone is gonna ask me about, which is how I rate ACOTAR and Fourth Wing on the spicy scale, because I feel like that helps them sort of judge. Because I feel like everyone's read those, so they can sort of really see what I mean if I talk about those series. So first, let's talk about how I rate a series. A lot of times a really spicy series, for example, Zodiac Academy, is a super slow burn because it's something like Enemies to Lovers, which means you need a lot of time and you need a lot of build up before you get to the spicy scenes, or they kind of don't make sense, or they kind of border over into the like non-con area. So for a series, Zodiac Academy is a 9-book series. I rate that entire series overall 4 Chili Peppers. However, there are books within the series, such as books like 1, 2, and maybe 3, that would be 1 and 2 Chili Peppers on their own. I'm not gonna go into the detail when I'm giving a book recommendation of rating each individual book on the spicy scale. So a lot of people will pick up Zodiac Academy, I've rated it 4 Chili Peppers, and they'll be like, girl, where is the spice? The whole series is what we're talking about. We have to rate a series by spice because it's overall, you have to incorporate the slow burn. You oftentimes have to wait. Like, I feel like if you're opening a book and 2 randos are just like getting with each other, number one, that's really awkward. It doesn't mean anything emotionally, and it's not something that I want to read about. So I will never be recommending stuff like that. The same thing goes for Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac, which is a 5-book series that is a 5 Chili Pepper rating. It is not 5 Chili Peppers in book 1, obviously, because the characters literally haven't met and don't know each other yet. So that just doesn't make sense, okay? So for the majority of the time, just to clear everything up, if I'm holding up the first book of a huge series, I'm gonna be rating the spicy scale on the entire series. And I do try to remain clear about that by like labeling it series spice or like spice so far if it's an unfinished series. And if I'm talking about one book, it's normally a standalone, it's the only book out in a series, and I will explicitly state that it is spice or spice so far. So then let's talk about the big question, how spicy is ACOTAR? What would I rate it? This is like the big tester question for if my spice lines up with yours. Let's talk about the primary books that have spice in them in the ACOTAR series. So if we're talking about book 1, A Court of Thorns and Roses, on my spicy scale, that would be a 1 to 1.5 Chili Pepper, because there are 2 on-page, explicit, detailed, open-door spicy scenes that are happening in that book. There is not no spice in ACOTAR. I feel like it's definitely a huge lie when people try to tell me like, ACOTAR is not spicy at all, there's no spice in ACOTAR, what are you talking about? There are quite literally 2 moderately length scenes in there that are very graphic and detailed. Now, when you put that next to a dark romance, that's not a lot, and that's also why I'm only rating it like 1 Chili Pepper. So when we move on to something like A Court of Mist and Fury, which has the 1-bed trope, which has like more spicy stuff in it, I would probably rate that a 2 to 2.5. I like to use 0.5 because it's really nuanced. It's not really black and white. And it also depends on like how long the scenes are, how they feel. Like maybe it's a really short scene, but it was a short scene that had like weird stuff in it. So we would rate A Court of Mist and Fury 2 to 2.5. And then we have to talk about A Court of Silver Flames, which that would probably be a 3.5 Chili Pepper book, because at that point, the romance and the spice starts to overtake the plot in A Court of Silver Flames. We have it happening very frequently. We've got some slightly taboo things happening. We've got tons of detail, over 10 pages when the scenes are happening, and that is the primary focus. I feel like 3 to 3.5, I don't know that it would quite be 4 Chili Peppers, but there is quite a lot, especially compared to the rest of the series. So when I talk about ACOTAR overall as a series, all 5 books in the series, I generally rate the whole series 3 Chili Peppers, because we've got very little in the beginning and then we have a lot at the end. So obviously if you're gonna pick up a series, hopefully you're not just reading the first book. So I'm giving you the spicy rating on like your overall experience, which is what I'm gonna do with every other series. So I hope that that helps. I hope that you understand my spicy scale a little bit more, and I hope that it makes sense. Let me know if we are aligned on how we rate spice. Let me know what level is your preferred spicy scale reading level. What is your favorite book from that series? And let me know what other questions you have about spice, the spicy scale, or anything having to do with spice, and we can answer it next time. Thanks for yapping about books with me. I will see you next time.